Hello, it's just David here with my weekly message. As you may have realised, this time of year, just after the feast of Peter and Paul, when we think of those first, two great apostles, Peter and Paul, founding the church, is a traditional time for ordinations. Indeed, the way our sort of school and university terms are structured in a way are slightly to do with kind of this being the end of the academic year, and obviously the church was responsible for lots of education, so it would produce people ready at the end of that year. There were other times, I mean sometimes Michaelmas and Trinity, but we've sort of focused now on this as the time of ordinations, and the Bible readings on a Sunday reflect that. And we're very happy this year's Catherine Alford was ordained as a priest, having come from St Mary's Welling and serving the Hatfield Team Ministry. Before that, we had the joy of Kirsty Wainwright being ordained and serving in St Albans. And next year, I'm very pleased to say, I can't quite give out every dietto yet, but we've got another curate coming here with their ordinations. Of course, different churches, and you may come from different backgrounds yourself, have different ways of doing things. Some have sort of bishops, priests, and deacons. Some have they're led by lay people. Various different churches have different ways of organising things and use different terminologies. Some are congregationalists, some have elders, some have deacons, some have presbyters, etc., etc. It can be quite confusing, and you might think, what does it matter? And I think probably I want to think about this and divide the churches into two, basically. One of the questions I get asked about curates is, when are we going to be sent a new one? And the other question is, when somebody like Catherine or Kirsty goes to be ordained, is where are you going to be sent? And the reason that's important is actually that the word sent is really important in that sentence, because the word apostle simply means somebody who's sent. So somebody who's sent somewhere to do something. So the apostles sent out by Jesus to do things. And one of the things they do is go and found and then look after the first Christian churches. And in a sense, that's one model. You're sent somebody, and it's a bit like sometimes people think the church ought to be like a big corporation, and if we're like a big corporation, then that's the model, isn't it? Head office sends somebody, and then they're the kind of next boss, and they sort you out. But there's another model, which is that congregations choose from within themselves, if you like, who should lead them. So you have a congregation. This is sort of more prevalent of independent congregationalist churches. They're really independent, and they choose perhaps deacons or elders or whatever, or even a minister from the congregation. And of course, there's very many models in between. So, for instance, you'll get some denominations where, even though they look for a minister from outside, they very much, but they're chosen by the congregation. So you get this thing of sort of preaching with a view, where ministers traditionally would go and preach, and then the local congregation would sort of choose the one they like, and that's rather different from the bishop just sending one. Now, the Church of England has a gloriously complex hybrid scheme, because it's trying to kind of keep everybody happy, which doesn't always work. The thing about sort of glorious hybrid schemes, a bit like the sort of constitution of the United Kingdom, is that although it looks kind of a bit sort of haphazard, and I mean, actually it can have lots of sort of rather subtle checks and balances put into it. And though, we sort of think, well, the House of Commons and the House of Lords and how they all work, and all the different local councils, and then what role does the monarchy play, and all that sort of thing. And you look at our constitution, it's all a bit sort of higgledy-piggledy. But then you say, well, where would you like to live? Somewhere military dictatorship or under a sort of orange president, or and people say, oh no, actually, we rather like the British way of doing things. It just appears, as I say, a bit chaotic. And the Church of England is very like that. We have a sort of hybrid system, as I say, which means that we have bishops, priests, and deacons. But you might have seen that bit at the beginning of the Vicar of Dibley, where they just wait and say, who's the bishop sent to us? And of course, Dawn French turns up, and the church warden doesn't even know who's coming. It's just waiting. And this woman arrives, and well, of course, that it never actually happened like that. We don't, there are some churches where that more or less does happen. The Roman Catholic Church is very like that, where priests really are pretty much sent by their bishop to various places. That's part of their obedience. But the Church of England isn't like that at all. So in a sense, they're sent, and people, when they're ordained, move away from the home church. They go somewhere else. They are sent somewhere. But when you're appointing a vicar, it's not like the Vicar of Dibley. The parish would be consulted. There would be parish representations. The parish would have a big hand in the sort of the advertising and the profile to make sure they got the person they wanted. The bishop would have to then sort of organise the interviews, and would have to sort of license the appointee. So he does have a role, and he could theoretically refuse to license somebody. But as I say, it's very much a hybrid system. Probably the best bit of the hybrid system, in that it's most eccentric, is the role of patrons, which sometimes can be the bishop, though often isn't, and isn't in the Welland team. Now, patrons can be any body, and by that I mean any single person, an individual sometimes, or an organisation or a body, or sometimes Oxbridge colleges do a lot of this. And the patrons really have the gift of the living. So if you take an example of in the team, and it's just again it's slightly complicated because you get all the patrons, but if you take Welland on its own, the patron is All Souls. So in other words, All Souls College, Oxford. So the for me to be appointed officially, I'm appointed by the patron, and then the bishop licensed me, and the parish kind of is there to approve me. I mean, actually, when I was appointed, nobody was on the interview panel from All Souls, though they did have to approve the appointment. The patron of Turin is Jesus College. I mean, not Jesus. Obviously, it's Jesus, but Jesus College, Cambridge, and they always did send somebody, and who would take a full part in the interview. So again, it varies. And again, it seems sort of haphazard, but in the past it has been a way of, keeping the power of bishops in check. That, there have been some places where the bishop can't just put his man in. And a lot of this is because the Church of England has, such a difficult history from the Reformation onwards. We've swung this way and that. There's been times of awful sort of persecution. There's been times of ill discipline, etc. And each time we've tried to kind of make the system right. I say a bit like the British Constitution, but that means it's kind of gone this way and that. But that, as I say, is very much the way churches divide. And I think, if you're confused by those different sorts of churches, different denominations, the way they operate, that's quite a good question to ask to kind of understand them. Is your minister sent to you, or do you kind of appoint your minister, and if so, is it from your own congregation? And actually, as I say, you get ones which are sort of hybrid in the middle, a bit like Anglican, but actually they tend to go one way or the other. Of course, each one has its merits. I mean, I'll say the first Christians, they tended to work on what's, and an apostolic model, so somebody would be sent. Paul goes around the place, he's sent, following his call to go and found these churches. So that's there is an argument that's the way the first Christians think of Augustine of Canterbury being sent by Pope Gregory to evangelize the British Isles. So again, that's a kind of in the Church of England psyche, that's how this country was first evangelized, by people being sent, and that's very often true of that sort of initial evangelization. So and I think sometimes that view from outside can be good. There's a danger that local communities just kind of, they become echo chambers reflecting themselves and their concerns. Of course, it can work the other way around. Actually, the person who's sent is entirely unsuitable, that he or she doesn't sort of have any understanding of the local context, perhaps comes from a very different background, a very different context themselves, and assumes lots of things about the local church and its people that just isn't true. And there's many times when someone comes from outside and gets it very, very wrong. That's true. So I think there's in a sense, I'm quite happy with the Anglican model, because actually I don't think it works if you just send people without consulting locality. And also, I think churches that just sort of from their own number select people, they tend to become very insular, and can be quite nastily insular, because they develop a certain traits which in a way is unpleasant in a way, and there's nobody outside to say, hey, hang on a minute, that's you shouldn't be going down that road, which sometimes what churches need. So as we think about these ordinations and about how churches order themselves and about how ministers, where they come from, as I say, it's all very, very confusing about what people do. But I think worth asking the question, are they sent to you, or do you decide from amongst your number? Anyway, hope that's a sort of helpful reflection.